question. Who do you think would win in a fight? A calamity class being born out of the something, I don't know, to be honest, I didn't pay attention to lore. Or a cute pink-haired girl and her stuffed animals? Well, I don't know, because I never got her on my account. Regardless, Wuthering Waves is a game with a very high skill ceiling. In fact, it's almost as high as the copium huffed by Genshin players such as myself who keep playing the game hoping its state will improve. Which is a lot, in case you didn't know. And since a big part of these sort of gacha games is grinding out bosses so that you can finally ascend that level 1 yin lane you accidentally got rather than a character you actually care about, generally speaking, the better you are at playing, the easier it will be to tackle those higher level challenges. This boss guide will be covering one of the weekly bosses, the Dreamless. A quick disclaimer that I'm not sure if later difficulties add extra movesets to this boss. As far as I know, the hologram challenges for the world bosses do this, but I'm not sure if the same can be said for the weekly challenges. If so, then I'll probably make an updated version of this guide later. Before we get into the fight, it's important to have an understanding of how parries and dodges work. If you already mastered this, then feel free to skip to the boss section. In order to perform a dodge, you need to press the sprint button just before an attack hits you. Both the left shift and right click on your mouse will do this, with the following controls being for Xbox and DualSense controllers. And for the 2 people out there who've managed to get the game running on mobile, good luck. When you perform a perfect dodge, the game will go into slow-mo for a few seconds and you can follow it up with a couple attacks. Just be careful because doing so will make you lose your invincibility frames, but since we're dealing with only one enemy here, it won't be that big of a deal. The important part, however, is learning how to counterattack/parry since that will greatly help in reducing the boss's vibration strength. It's kind of like Honkai Star Rail's toughness bar or Genshin's shields. In order to parry, all you have to do is press whatever button's your normal attack button. You can even parry with your skill or burst. Not every attack can be countered, and you'll know whenever it's possible since this yellow indicator will pop up. Now, the timing for when to attack does vary based on numerous factors. Some attacks will feel significantly easier to counter. The big problem with this system is that the on-screen indicator is more so there to give you a general idea of the timing. If it's a close-range attack, then you'll usually need to press the button just before or just as the yellow circle overlaps with the outer one. But if you have an attack like this one, for example, timing it with the on-screen indicator is pointless since it only marks the beginning of the strike and the enemy has to still lunge towards you. As far as I know, each character has slightly different timings, so it can be difficult to get it right. For example, Danjon's attacks are incredibly fast, which makes it feel as if the timing has to be a bit more precise. Meanwhile, there are characters whose kits include skills that make countering a whole lot easier. For example, you can hold Yashin's skill to enter a counter state of sorts, similar to Beidou from Genshin Impact. In fact, I highly recommend using this character if you do come across certain bosses where the counters are difficult to get. Especially if you're planning to do all of the endgame content, since you could just dodge a bunch of stuff, but breaking the vibration bar is going to be essential for later, more difficult challenges. Some bosses also have special skills that can be countered by certain echoes, and you're free to look up this stuff online, but to be honest, I still don't know a ton about it, and I want to make this guide with the assumption that you have almost no gear. In my case, this demonstration is going to stick to normal attacks so as to not complicate things. Oh, and one other thing about countering. Resonators who use guns cannot counter. So, that sucks. For my demonstration, I'll be using the following team. It isn't necessarily free-to-play friendly, but you can easily pull off the same thing with your main character and anyone else you have. Well, most of them. Plus, you should have like 2 to 3 5-stars already given all the free stuff. I highly recommend practicing the timing of whatever character you use to counter to sort of get a feel for it. Just like how I'd love to get a feel of Baiju's boot. There's 2 main phases of this boss fight, if you can even call it that. After you break the vibration meter once, a few things change in the boss fight. For now, let's talk about the types of attacks the Dreamless will cycle through for the first phase. These include 2 types of Wayne Slashes. The first is a single strike, and the second variation of this attack has the boss do 2 hits, 1 per Wayne. Next is an attack where he rotates his wings to strike the ground 3 times. I like to call this one the Helichopper. Following this, there are 3 different attacks that the Dreamless does with its scythe. First is 2 consecutive slashes. Second, the boss hurls their game controller at you out of sheer frustration due to you insulting his mom in a Call of Duty match, and then proceeds to charge at you. At least I think that's how the attack went. Last but certainly not least, it will release a single strike after a long build-up. This attack is one that can be countered. Oh, and then there's this move where the boss sucks and then blows you. From this point onward, we'll be naming this attack the Sucksplosion. Jesus, these jokes f***ing suck. But it's not like you can complain. After all, I'm the one making the guide, bitch. For now, let's focus on the first phase of attacks, because there's no point in talking about the second phase if you can't even survive long enough to see it. The three most important things to study about these attacks are 1. The visual cue that lets you know which specific attack is being used, 2. The proper timing for dodges and counters, and 3. The general pattern of what order these moves are used in. Two attacks that can be challenging to differentiate are the single and double wing slashes, as they are fundamentally the same thing. However, one key difference between the two is that when the boss is performing the double strike, the wings will flash red just before each hit. This small detail only happens in this attack, meaning that if there's no glow, the Dreamless is about to do a single strike. It also makes the timing of the double swing significantly easier, as all you have to do is press the dodge button shortly after that red glow appears. Since this visual cue isn't on the single strike, it makes that one a bit harder to dodge, but if you pay attention to the moment the wings stop winding up and begin to move towards you and press the dodge, you should get the timing down no problem. If you dodged that first attack but still aren't sure which of the two it is, remember, look out for that second red flash. Next, let's tackle the Helichopper. The moment you see the boss wind up for this attack, I recommend outright avoiding these two first strikes and only dodge on the final hit. Just remember that there is a slight delay in the third swing. Hell, you might not even have to dodge at all, although I still do recommend it. If you're more focused on survivability, it's best to just stay clear. However, if you're wanting to follow up with some damage, then make sure to dodge in the direction of the boss. That way you can hit it following the third strike. Overall, this is probably one of the easiest attacks to avoid. The three different scythe attacks all have their own separate cues. If the boss raises its hand to summon the scythe, then teleports away for a brief moment before lunging forward, it's going to use its double slash. Make sure to dodge just as the arm starts to swing forward with the scythe. And you'll want to press the dodge button right after the first one is finished, as the second slash starts almost immediately after the first one. The next two attacks can also be easily mixed up due to the similar posing of the boss, but there are distinct differences between the two once you focus on the visual cues. First is this star-shaped flash that briefly appears on the screen, as it only shows up for this particular scythe attack. Next is the fact that the boss isn't holding its scythe in the windup. Both of these are indicators that the Dreamless is about to go full-on gamer rage, chucking its weapon in your direction, then lunging towards you to launch a follow-up attack. No, not that type of follow-up attack. Once the boss fully turns around, you can activate your dodge and should evade the projectile. Even if you're a bit late in the button press, your character should dodge. The scythe's hitbox is a lot smaller than the on-screen visuals make it out to be. The second half of this attack is a basic lunge forward. The boss sort of moves in a counterclockwise direction. Just activate the dodge when he's at the lowest point. If we use the clock analogy, it's when he's at the 6 o'clock position. Now, if the boss is in this pose while holding its scythe, it means it's about to deliver a single strike. This is the first of two attacks that can be countered. It's one of the easier attacks to parry, so as long as you've gotten used to whatever character you're using, it should be fine. Of course, if you're a complete pussy, you can always dodge it, it's fine. The yellow indicator also makes it incredibly easy to avoid. Last but certainly not least, let's talk about the Sucksplosion. Yeah, it looks kind of intimidating, but in my opinion, it's the easiest attack to avoid. There's no need for visual cues, since you'll know when the attack's being used. However, the key to avoiding it is focusing on the arms. Once they move down to the chest, get ready to dodge. As the boss starts to spread them outward, that's your cue to press the button. There's a considerable amount of delay in this attack, so chances are you'll dodge too early for the first few times and mess it up. So originally this next part was a thorough breakdown of the patterns of the Dreamless's attacks, but it was a lot of yapping and walls of text, so let me simplify it more for you. This is a list of the order of moves used by the boss in one of my runs. The most important part is how the only move consistently used is the single counterable slash. If we rearrange this in a more comprehensible pattern, you'll notice that the boss uses it every third attack. Thus, the overall cycle looks a lot like this. The first attack in this cycle is always the Helichopper or Suck. In fact, these moves seem to alternate per cycle, and the second move used in the cycle seems to depend on if the first move was the Helichopper or Suck. If it's the Helichopper, it will follow up with either the Scythe Throw and Lunge or double Scythe Swipe. But if the first move was Suck, then the next attack is either the single or double Wing Slash. Hence, to get through the full cycle of the Dreamless's attacks, you'll have to go through 6 attacks. And then that repeats from the very beginning. Another quick note is that since the Dreamless always begins a boss battle with the Wing Slashes, technically speaking, the fight starts on that second attack of the cycle. But then once it does that counterable attack, it goes into a repeated pattern. I hope that explanation made sense because the original was a lot more wordy. Honestly, though, I think it's better to pay attention to the visual cues of each attack rather than relying on boss patterns, since doing so will probably confuse you. Okay, let's talk about the rest of the boss's movement, starting with what's, in my opinion, the hardest attack to deal with. Immediately after the Dreamless recovers from its stagger, it follows up with 6, yes, 6 attacks. So, if you don't want to get as stonlocked as Ziox gets whenever someone brings up the Yai vs. Fischl debate in his stream, pay close attention. This will be on the midterm. The answer to that question is obviously Fischl, by the way. The first hit in this combo is an AoE blast. The Dreamless then moves to the side and quickly lunges forward with 2 consecutive slashes. And after a short delay, does one final swipe. After this, the boss flies to one end of the arena, engulfing itself in a dark vortex of sorts, before hurling towards you with its scythe. Getting hit by this attack will stun the player, preventing them from dodging the following attack. And, yeah, you really don't want to get hit by this. It's another AoE shockwave that deals a considerable amount of damage. Because this is one attack, the order in which these happen stays the same, so as long as you memorize the sequence, you can focus entirely on dodging, which is easier said than done. The reason it's so difficult isn't necessarily due to the challenge, more so the fact that you'll only see this attack chain like once or twice in the Dreamless boss fight. It always happens the first time you break the vibration bar, but based on personal experience, subsequent staggers do not yield the same results. Instead, they have this other AoE attack with the wings. On a more positive note, since this sequence rarely happens, it means you have to deal with it less, but it also makes it harder to practice. Getting the timing for the first AoE blast is incredibly difficult since the attack doesn't have much buildup. When the boss recovers from its stagger, they'll sort of curl up into a ball. Try to time your dodge for the moment you see this star-shaped flash, and just hope that you have the timing right. For those who aren't confident in their dodging, one great alternative is Zhonling. Luckily, this AoE attack does have limited range, so you can outright avoid the attack entirely by maintaining some distance. However, dodging does let you get some additional attacks in just before the boss recovers. This also applies to the other AoE attack with the wings. In this case, you want to dodge when the Dreamless begins to spin its body. Personally, the thing I struggle with the most is the 3 slashes following this bit. The first attack happens so quickly that you'll likely make the mistake of dodging too late. I can't really say much here other than you'll have to practice the timing of it. Getting hit by any of these might lead you to getting wombo comboed into the air. Depending on your positioning, some of these slashes might even miss the player, if you're lucky. Now, your main priority throughout all this should be dodging the last 2 attacks, unless you're at the point in the game where you're getting one-shot by everything, and if that's the case, then get good, I guess? While you can't see the boss in this vortex, it's pretty easy to dodge the stun attack. There's a distinct audio cue that plays whenever the boss is about to lunge forward. Shortly after you hear this chime, activate your dodge and you should avoid the strike. At first, this AoE shockwave looks intimidating, but it also has an audio cue that helps make this part significantly easier to avoid. Now, since this attack is a shockwave, your timing will depend on how far you are from the blast. In order for my strategy to work, you should be fine as long as you stay in the middle-ish part of the arena. You want to wait until you hear this shockwave blast effect. Immediately after, activate your dodge and you'll evade the attack no problem. Aside from this, the only big changes to the boss are some additional moves and a change in attack patterns. The first new attack has the Dreamless summon a sword and launch 3 strikes, followed up with another AoE blast. Second is this lunge attack that can be parried. If the boss teleports away and raises its left arm, the moment it teleports back, it will initiate the 4-hit combo. The moment the arm starts to swing towards you, make sure to dodge. The timing between the first and second strikes is very similar to the double scythe attack, so you'll want to immediately dodge again once the current one finishes. Since the third attack is delayed a bit, make sure to wait a brief moment before dodging again. It might take a few attempts to get the timing down. The Dreamless then teleports right in front of you and uses its AoE attack. Wait for the flashing star effect to leave the screen and dodge just as the boss's body goes downward. It'll be pretty obvious when the Dreamless is about to use its lunge attack, since the yellow indicator will appear when it's at a distance. This is the perfect example of why the timing of counters differs based on attacks. Once it hits the outer circle, that only means that the Dreamless's attack has begun. To properly parry, wait a bit longer than you would with the other strike. Since I'm using Danjin, my timing is different than if I were to use a character like Verena or Jianshin. Again, it might take a while to master, but it's still one of the easier moves to counter. And for any of those out there that aren't confident in their dodging skills, just come close for a sec. I need to tell you how to dodge this because it's a very difficult move to dodge, okay? If you're not going to counter it, you have to do something very important. If you mess this is like one of the hardest parts of the boss, okay? You have to make sure that you do absolutely nothing. What's that? You think I'm joking? No, literally, like, you could just stand there. For some reason, if you stand still, the boss, like, never hits you. Yeah, just do nothing. There you go. You dodge the attack. But okay, hear me out for a sec. Bigger brain strategy. You try to get the counter timing, and then if you don't, well, you still don't get hit. There you go. Win-win situation. You're welcome. The last significant change to go over is the boss pattern. After breaking the vibration bar for the first time, the following things happen to the moveset. Rather than the single strike every third attack, it's now every 5th attack. The first attack in this new boss cycle will either be the single or double wing slash, and this time the second attack will not alternate between the Helichopper and Suck, it will just be Suck. And you know that obnoxious 4-hit combo we just talked about? Yeah, well, get used to it because that's going to be a part of every cycle's third attack. So you're gonna have to either get good or, I don't know, wail, I guess? However, the 4th attack will either be that new lunge attack you can counter, or the double scythe swipe from the first phase. And, just like the first phase, this ends with that single scythe strike we've all come to know and love. Rinse, repeat, victory. A couple additional things to add. I highly recommend that with any boss you're struggling with, you first master dodging the attacks. Don't worry at all about dealing damage. If you try to do that, it might hinder the learning process. Find out the proper timing and make it a test of endurance to see how long you can hold out. Over time you'll get much better at it, and then you can start adding in attacks here and there. Same goes with parries and counters. Once you've mastered it, you can start using your skills and bursts to try countering. And most importantly, don't rush it. There's nothing wrong with taking it slow if that's what you need to do to ensure survivability. I guess what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, if being a sweaty gamer isn't your playstyle, there's no need to try and force it if it ends up hindering your enjoyment of the game. And if after all of this you still can't properly dodge and keep dying, well, there's always Genshin Impact.